I'm Randy Moggins of Off Planet Radio, and after we did our first interview together, White Wolf von Atzingen approached me about doing some sessions together, sitting down and basically breaking out some new information, some things that he's not talked about or written about in his book. And there's an intent and a purpose to what we're about to embark on. This is going to be part one of a multi-part series, and we are recording this on May the 18th, 2012. White Wolf, maybe what we do here in the first few minutes is kind of spell out what your intents were in doing this series, where you're going to go with it, and also outline what the bottom line is, because we're not just coming on here like a whistleblower type thing so much as you're going to open up some new things, part of your life, and also in terms of where this all goes, because you're going to be sharing information that is to benefit others.
Correct, Randy. I mean, the whole intent of this, hopefully, radio series that we can record here is to get some information out to people in order to help them in their own lives, perhaps embark on their own healing path a little bit deeper, with a few more perspectives and perhaps a few more tools under their belt, so to speak. I mean, this is a huge part of what I teach here in Vermont at Ways of the Wild Institute. One of the main tiers of the school is self-healing and whatnot. And so I do a lot of courses on that up here, but I realize that not everybody can come to these courses. They can't travel, and they're a little bit timid as to actually looking into the learning CDs and actually learning DVDs that I have that contain a ton of information on self-healing techniques. So I thought it would be a really good idea to get some of these techniques onto the air so that the listeners can bring them into their own lives, see where they fit, see how they work for them, and do so in a simple offering, to the world. What I have to express is that the techniques that I teach and share are techniques that I have utilized myself on the many years of my healing path. I do not claim that they will work for everybody. I do know that they have worked for me, and I do know that they have worked for the majority of my students who have come through Ways of the Wild Institute. So this has, given me a lot of promise that these techniques can definitely work for a wide variety of people coming from a wide variety of backgrounds.
A lot of people may wonder why we're doing a healing series and thinking that they don't need this. Maybe what you can help me to understand is there's a very diverse group of people, and I would suspect that you deal from time to time with people who are coming from trauma-based backgrounds, maybe people that have come out of military or intelligence projects, or people that have a background in ritual or sexual abuse or something like that. But really, there's a broader spectrum, I suspect, that can benefit as well from what you're offering in the healing modalities.
Correct, yeah. There are a lot of people who come to me who, yes, indeed, they have come from Black Ops projects, military. They have come from, extreme sexual abuse, ritual abuse. They've come from all different manner of programming and mind control projects and whatnot. But I also have people who come who, simply can't put the pieces together in their life. They're really struggling on getting anywhere, making a life for themselves that they really like. The techniques that I teach are geared towards everybody, because there isn't a person in the world today that does not need to work on self-healing. Just the environment we live in, even if you live out in the country, or out in the mountains or out in the desert, seemingly away from everything, the amount of electrical interference and technological interference, period, that is in our atmosphere, is absolutely insane. It starts from before birth, and it just continues with the chemicals and the pollutants on all levels that are continually bombarding us. So, we all have our issues, and I am not one to say that anybody's issues are better or worse than another's. It's all perspective. I have some people who come to me who have some really, really hardcore backgrounds, similar to mine. And I have other people who come to me who, if you tried to compare them, would seemingly be a very light background. Just, kind of your general trauma-based, family issues, friends issues, whatnot. And the techniques that I've been presenting to them and the processes that I've been walking them through have worked for both ends of the spectrum. So it's really nice, that the healing path for everybody is really the same path. It's about attaining a better quality existence. I don't care where you're coming from. I don't really even care where you want to go. As long as you want a better quality existence, that is a healing path. Okay? Because we're not only talking about healing the body, but also the mind, the spirit, the emotions, all aspects of yourself. Because if you don't take in the entire scope, the process, whatever process you try to embrace, whatever path of healing you try to walk, will be incomplete. And you'll just get frustrated along the way and quit.
I know I've said in interviews before with different people that I've interviewed that we have to own up to the fact that everybody has been subjected to trauma and everybody has been subjected to mind control, even though most people are unaware of it. And you talked about this electrical atmosphere that we now live in. We're bathing in it. There's almost no place on this planet where we can go and escape the EMF and all of the other waves that are shooting at us. And these are not natural waves like what comes into Earth naturally with background radiation. Some of the things that I don't think people are aware of is the necessity to reground, to reconnect, to get back in tune with the Earth, and how critical this is in order to even just emotionally, physically, mentally survive right now. How do you address that in the things that you do? Obviously, by definition, your entire system is kind of based around this return to nature.
It is, and that's a huge principle of Ways of the Wild Institute. It's getting people, back to the earth, back to the elements. And, some people might get the wrong impression that I'm trying to teach people how to basically get back to living primitively, and that's not the intent of the school at all. Yes, I do teach a lot of primitive skills, both wilderness living and wilderness survival skills that can be utilized in any environment around the world, but that's not the main intent. The main intent is to get people doing hands-on skills as a means to help them ground, center, and focus through the deeper aspects of self-awareness and self-healing. Because I noticed most people that come to me, they don't have a sense of center or grounding, and so if you try to lead them down a self-healing path that is unique unto their own, without giving them something physical to do along the way, they get lost. They have a very hard time making it their reality and seeing how it connects to their reality in all aspects of their life. And so, what I do here in the beautiful Green Mountains of Vermont is I do just that. I present an atmosphere, a very natural atmosphere, to help people get away from the normal hustle and bustle or maybe even chaos of their daily life and slip them into a place that has no time. in the wilderness that has only universal laws, into a place that is visually untouched by modern society. I do teach in wilderness areas, so there are no trails, there are no roads, there's nothing in there except for the wilderness. So it is an absolutely perfect place to tap into the raw energy of the earth, and really get down and dirty and do your work. So whether I'm teaching awareness or whether I'm teaching survival skills or whether I'm teaching living skills or whether I'm teaching philosophy or whatever, as long as it's taking place in the warm season, it's outdoors. The only classes I teach outdoors in the winter are the actual survival skills in winter, but the philosophy skills in the winter are taught indoors. So, but still, I also pick the areas up here that are very removed. The areas that I work with indoors are in very, very small communities or just sitting out in the middle of the mountains. There's no community around them. So again, it's very conducive to the healing path and really focusing on it.
What about people who have, let's say, physical limitations? People who think they're too old, too young, too short, too fat.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because the youngest student I've ever had was 5 years old, and the oldest student I've ever had was 74 or 75. And I actually had 2 years ago. I had a group of women. They were all over the age of 68, and they all wanted to come out and actually learn some hands-on survival skills. So I brought them out into the wilderness, and I pace it to the group. Every group is different. If there's somebody that has a physical limitation to the point where they cannot make it into the wilderness, I do hold more conducive classes that take place in more of a yard situation. So yes, I do cater to that, definitely. But as far as people who think they're too old, I don't buy that. You're never too old.
I've seen that. I've seen that recently with some groups that I've worked with. The age spectrum going from very young up to people who are elderly, and watching people. A lot of times, the older people just seem so beautiful in their commitment to this. It's like something that they never had a chance to explore before, and it's like a world opens up to them. I suspect that a lot of the things that you impart come, even though they're physical, at the same time you're kind of streaming the spiritual and the psychological type things into it. I have a sense that that's probably multi-dimensional on that level.
I can't teach two-dimensional. Sorry, if you're looking for that, don't come here because you won't find it. Yeah, I wrap it all together because, when I'm teaching somebody, whether I'm teaching philosophy or whether I'm teaching spirituality or whether I'm teaching, actual hands-on physical skills, whether that be wilderness living or whether that be wilderness survival, I do not teach flat skills. I teach the meaning behind it. I teach you how to use the skill to tap the multidimensional aspect of yourself, the wilderness, everything. So yeah, it's all wrapped into one.
So as we talked when we initially agreed to begin doing this series, a lot of what we're going to deal with in the early part of this is laying some groundwork that's going to be your background. And again, like I said, this is not to pique people's curiosity or titillate them. I think there's enough media out there that have done the expose, whistleblower type stuff that, if people want to indulge in that, this has an opposite purpose, actually. To get some information exposed is useful to the final stream that we want to go to in these interviews, which is the healing. And in order to understand that, White Wolf's agreed to kind of lay out some things that he's not talked about before in his past, and it will give you a sense as well, if you've heard prior interviews either on this show or on other interviews that he's done. It gives you a background by which to gauge maybe perhaps your own situation and understand that from the extreme ends of trauma-based mind control and background, it's possible for you to kind of inject yourself into that and understand that your situation can be addressed by the things that White Wolf's going to talk about.
Yeah, this little section of information, it's interesting, Randy. When we originally spoke about this about a month ago, when we talked about maybe the series, I was completely neutral on the whole thing, and I said, yeah, it's a good idea. We'll lay it out there, and I'll touch on this aspect of my past that I have not touched on in any detail anywhere else before, because I think it will help people who have been kind of following my life and what I'm doing now get a little bit of a different perspective and maybe a greater scope on some of the areas that I come out of, so that they can better understand as this series goes on where some of these techniques that I'm going to be presenting are actually coming from and on what levels they actually tap into. But it's interesting, about 4 days ago, I began having serious second thoughts, and reservations about presenting this information. Not so much the healing techniques, but what I'm about to present here. And I realized, I really did a lot of deep looking and connections and communications, and realized that these feelings are due to programming, trying to keep me quiet about this material. And so I'm really going to bite the bullet here, so to speak, and do my best to go through with this and present this section of my past before we actually get into discussing any kind of actual healing path and technique set that we can utilize in any aspect of life. And those of you who have read my book, Shadow Scorpion, Memoirs of an Assassin, who have read the large number of blogs that I've written on my website, Ways of the Wild Institute, have heard me on radio shows over the past year, you understand a fair amount of my past and the trauma-based situations that I've come out of. And this little piece of information I'm going to throw out here might put a little bit more of a twist on it. It'll also help to clarify some things that I briefly touched upon in my book, but didn't lay out in any detail until now. And this is not like Randy said, this is not a whistleblower thing. This is not to get your sympathy or anything else. This is to give you a little bit more background on a different level of dynamic so that you can better understand the rest of the series. And that's it. So I guess what we need to do is go back quite a ways. Because in my book, those of you who read it, you might have remembered two small sections where, let's see, I believe it was the lead training instructor, who in the book's name was Blake, and the old man, whose name was Amon in the book. They briefly touched on what they called werewolf genetics and genetic manipulation projects. Like I said, I touched on it, and I left it at that. But Amon, who was the old man in my book, who he had spent his long, long years in life working within many different agencies in the government. He spent decades and decades inside the deep areas of the United States government, and his scope of knowledge was absolutely amazing. He was literally a walking encyclopedia. He was a library full of information that most people just don't even hear of, don't even know about. And one of the things he did very well for the government was he worked on medical experimentations. He worked in biowarfare. He worked in all kinds of genetic manipulation aspects of the government projects. He worked in many, many underground bases around the country. He also worked in many above-ground labs from coast to coast. He was quite amazing in his knowledge, and he is the one that helped to clarify a lot of this area of my past, because I have many, many memories, very clear memories, all the way back to probably when I was about 12 years old, that in the earlier aspects of my life I thought were very odd, very strange. My childhood teacher, however, he was an individual who believed that everything has a purpose, everything has a place, otherwise it wouldn't exist. And so he always taught me that this is part of my place, this aspect of me does have a purpose, and that I shouldn't fight it, that I should simply accept that that's the way it is, and learn to live with it. So to him, it was something sacred. To him, to Michkalain, everything was sacred. So this was really no different. But, for a long time, I struggled with that a lot because I didn't see anything sacred about it. But I was a part of a program, actually when I was still in utero. I was not born yet. I was inside my mother's womb, and I was born in a military hospital, as I have stated before. It was actually Fort Dix in New Jersey, which happens to be in the Pine Barrens, which is a very interesting place. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
But the program, I found out the name of many years later, through Amon, by the way, has a series of letters. They're all capitalized, so it's definitely an acronym, and I do not know what each letter stands for. I just have the acronym. It's capital L, capital I, capital Y, hyphen, capital C, capital O, capital N, slash, delta, hyphen A, capital A. And this was the name of the program. And it was a genetic manipulation program that took place through the Air Force. And it was based, I do not know if it is still there today, or if the program is even in existence anymore today, or if it's simply evolved into other programs. But the base of this program was in the underground facility beneath Fort Dix, which spanned out throughout the massive tunnel system that goes underneath the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. And there were, this was a whole genetic manipulation project that was based upon three main things. One was my genetics. Two was the mind patterns that I came into life with, as well as mind patterns that carried through my frequency field from past life genetic manipulation experiences
This was the part that when I think I've heard everything, my jaw drops and I go, oh, I didn't see that coming.
And the third one was my frequency in this life.
Now, let me ask you this, White Wolf. The time period here in which, of course, obviously, your gestation period, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was in the very early 70s.
Okay.
So 71. And supposedly, Aman told me that this project was a very powerful and very active project in the early 70s. And like I said, the main project was centered in the subterranean base under Fort Dix, spanned out into the many subterranean structures that laces the Pine Barrens still today. Huge genetic manipulation project facilities exist under the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Between this fact and the sheer amount of odd, whatever you want to call them, energy vortexes that are found throughout the Barrens, make them a very interesting place.
Yes, they're a very interesting place, and there are people who know and have documented some of the things that they call paranormal, which are probably just part of the natural energetics, and I assume they're amplified somewhat as well by the existence of that base there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure it is. I've been through the Barrens a number of times. People go missing in the Barrens all the time. Many people are never found, and they're not reported. It's not public information. I mean, you would have to go through high up law enforcement agencies to find the names. As a matter of fact, there's an individual who just, I guess within the last maybe year or so, wrote a series of books, 2 I believe, about missing people in the wilderness or national parks, I believe it was. He did one for the eastern United States and one for the western United States. I would have to look his name up. But he's very, very interesting individual. He's actually an old-time law enforcement officer himself, and he has been studying these disappearances.
It's David Paulides?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
That wasn't me. I actually Googled this, so.
Yeah. That's okay. So anyway, the Pine Barrens is a really screwed up area. Beautiful, but when you're there and you're actually out in them and you really tap into what's there, it's an interesting place. And certain areas of the Pine Barrens, if you go to, it's very quiet. But if you stand there in that quietness, you will hear a hum coming from underground, from these bases. And it's loud enough where the animals that live in those areas are very disturbed, and there are some areas where the birds, they avoid the areas completely, all right, because they're very sensitive to these frequencies. So anyway, here nor there, that is where this experience set in this life for me began. And I guess when I was between the ages of 7 and 13, I have very clear memories of continuing genetic procedures that took place in Pennsylvania. Now I really don't pretend to know how this works, but from what I've been told by Aman in my book, as well as details picked up as I've been going through my healing path, the technological biochemistry techniques involved are quite complicated. I was born with a very high level wolf frequency. And I have seen and been told in more of a confirmation means that during Atlantis time, so this is, ancient simultaneous existences, if you want to put a time frame on them, I had 3 main lives in which I was directly part of the human-animal genetic manipulation projects. And the specific projects in all 3 lives were between human and wolf. And anybody who wants to know more about genetic manipulation projects that took place during the Atlantis time can look at civilizations that came directly after, like Egypt. You look at their drawings, you look at their gods, and they're all half man, half animal, and this is because they brought the belief systems and the energetic tappings of genetic manipulation into their culture from the Atlantis projects. Of course, this is all reptilian-based and all that yada yada stuff.
I mean, you and I had talked about this as well, that my research indicates this goes back to Atlantis and some of the experiments that occurred there, some of the spiritual things that occurred there as well, because apparently some of this animal spiritism was a part of the culture in Atlantis, to my understanding as well.
Yes, yeah, it was especially during the later time frame of Atlantis, after heavy reptilian influence, had moved in. This is when these projects were intense. And this stuff, people don't understand it, but this stuff still goes on today on a very large scale. And this stuff is not just United States based. This stuff spans the globe.
Yes. We've interviewed Barry King from the UK, and Barry confirms a lot of this stuff going on at bases like Peacemoor and also the big base down in Australia, like
Pine
Gap.
Pine Gap. Yeah. Yep, definitely. Yeah, definitely. This is a very real aspect of our modern world, and it has roots into an ancient world. So anyway, so I hold the wolf frequency in body and mind very strongly in this life, and somehow the people who ran this project, enhanced the wolf frequency that I already had quite strongly, and manipulated my own genetics by physical and frequency-wise implanting of hybrid wolf genetics. And the process had something to do with altering my genetics while I was in the fetus stage. And Amon had a decent amount of experience with such projects, though he never told me if he was actually involved with this particular project or similar ones. But he definitely had a pretty good idea of what genetic manipulation was all about. But he told me that my mother was actually taken because he had access to files that I have never seen about me and my family. But he told me that when my mother was taken, when she was in an altered state, into a military hospital in New Jersey during her pregnancy, near where my father was stationed. And we lived, I guess she lived, right outside the bases. So, it was right there in the Pine Barrens and everything else. So it's not like she had to travel from states to get there. And there I went under frequency targeting and injections of some kind that changed the genetic coding. And it was during this process that I, in the fetus stage, was traumatized, and the grounds were laid in my mind for what they called demon attachments. And this demon energy bound with the manipulated wolf genetics and frequency to create an altered state of human wolf, or, the common layman term is werewolf. And during this creation, the human wolf frequency was literally piggybacked onto my pure wolf frequency so that I would never find it, and my mind would always accept it as me. Now, certain demon energies were layered at entry points into this human wolf frequency, which prevented me from getting anywhere near it. See, since everything is created by frequency, if you can force the frequency to change, you then can, in extreme cases, change the physical structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this process can be greatly enhanced and intensified through these genetic manipulation projects, where the physical DNA is also being manipulated with whatever the heck it is they inject while the body is still in the fetus stage, still growing, and before it's actually fully formed. And then triggers were placed within this frequency. And then a handler was assigned to me who had direct access to it. And in my book, I gave her the name Lilith. Her real first name is Diana. I will not disclose her last name because she is still alive and kicking out there. But she was not the only one who had this access. I know of two others who had it as well, though they didn't have the full access. They only had partial access. And yes, I do know who both of them are. Anyway, an astral being beyond the demon frequencies supposedly was also plugged into the human wolf frequency to assist in controlling it during shifts or activations. And this being is a lower astral entity that seems to have familiar energy readings with this type of genetic manipulation. Now, when this frequency in me was activated, it would change the frequency pattern of my mind, which would alter the frequency of my body to match the human-wolf hybrid frequency. And of course, my body and mind would then literally shift to match this frequency. I would lose conscious awareness, and the programs within and the handlers dictating my actions would then claim full control. This is not to say that my mind would go into a dead state and the handlers and controllers would act through me.
Right, yeah.
What I mean is that waking conscious would be locked out while this hybrid human-wolf altered state of mind would become present.
This is effectively a compartmentalized alternate personality that's triggered in the process.
Yes. Yeah. And over the years, I've learned to become aware of when this frequency is being triggered, and I have learned to block it. To this day, I can block it, but it's both mentally and physically excruciating to do so. And I think this is probably because it was through pain and torture, as well as obvious genetic alteration, that it was placed in me in the first place. My wife has seen me begin to shift many times, and the times she was around, she somehow managed to stop the completion of the shift. I wrote a lot about her aspect in my life in the book, Shadow Scorpion. She's pretty gifted on many levels. And many times in my past, I would wake up in the morning in my bed with dirt-caked feet and smeared dried blood all over my body. I had no wounds, but the blood to have been mine. Dried stuff I would find under my nails and sometimes in my teeth. It's like I would have to get up and floss. I would literally freak out, inside. And I would, scrub down, hard in the shower and brush and floss like 3 times before I would stop. I used to, my wife can tell you, I used to bathe 2 or 3 times a day. Because these events continued to happen, and I could never explain them. And it was an area of my life that was that was definitely a gray zone. And my wife would tell me things. She'd say, she says, we were, at the time of this particular series of events, we were living at like 9,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains. Middle of winter. It was January, February, billowing snow and, sub-zero temperatures outside. And, the moon would come out, and it would be like daylight outside. And she says, I would come out, in the middle of the night, and you'd be standing in a living room, stark naked, staring out the window, and then she says I'd come back to bed, and within seconds after turning around, I would hear the door open and close, and you would be gone. If I went out there just in my human skin, I would freeze to death in a matter of up at that elevation and those temperatures.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, 15 minutes. Now again, these are certainly not some kind of, claims of invincibility, because that's not even close. These are simply some things in my life that just don't add up.
I guess one question I have is, given that a lot of times you were in remote locations, you were being tracked, that you had an implant, and that the triggering was being done by via satellite?
Most likely. I actually posted some photographs on my website, on my blog, of some of the implants that I found in X-rays. So it's very possible that this triggering was through satellite. But also I did notice as the years went on that the triggering would happen during specific time frames of the moon's cycle. And that's not to say that it would happen like, every first quarter moon, but the time frames of the moon would associate with select date numberings.
Okay.
So these were programmed triggers into the genetic frequency matrix. So when these dates and this time frames of the natural cycles of the moon and the Earth and the Sun would come about, it would act as a natural trigger. So yeah, just some odd things that I was able to do throughout my life that never really add up in my mind until this aspect of my awareness came about. In my past, I would spar in martial arts for many hours every week. I had a few highly trained people whom I would spar with weekly, and many times we would spar for 6 hours straight. We didn't take a break. We just sparred for 6 hours straight. And they would always comment on my speed and how it was almost impossible for them to touch me. And this was interesting because years later I would test this speed, and I would stop training for months while they would continue training daily. And then we'd get together and spar, and they would tell me, if anything, I would get faster. I've also been told many times by many people, including my physical therapist, that my strength doesn't fit the size of my body. I'm not saying I can lift 1,000 pounds, because I can't. I'm just saying that for the size of my body, I have a strength that just doesn't fit the muscle structure that I have. And again, I would test this by avoiding, major activities that would sustain such strength for, many months. I remember a number of times in my past, I would stop strength training, for a year. One time I stopped for 2 years. And afterwards, I went back and tested my strength to find out that it hadn't changed at all. These things don't add up. Speed, strength, they take practice. They take diligence. You got to keep them up. They're skills that you have to continually work on. And this is very interesting. When I was when I was born, I had my blood tested like all infants, and I was tested as an A positive. I had surgery at the age 5. This is actually when my first implant was put in, and my blood was still supposedly A positive. And I was born in a military hospital, so they tested it, and then the surgery at age 5 took place in a different state, different doctors. It came out the same, A positive. And from the time I was born through my childhood and mid-teens, I was allergic to almost everything under the sun. I mean, food, plants, molds, temperature change, insects, you name it. However, after I left the training facility at age 19, all my allergies disappeared almost overnight. And my blood type today is O positive. I've had it tested a number of times, and each time it comes up very clear, O positive. And blood type doesn't change. Either somebody messed up twice in 2 different hospitals, actually 3, because I had surgery when I was 7 as well that showed A positive with different doctors. So either somebody messed up 3 times, or something very odd went on. And even when I had my blood tested recently, and over the past 3 years, it took 3 tests before my blood would register at all as any type of human blood. And then when it did, it came up with O positive. Now, interesting, because Amon had told me that in the training facility, genetic updates were done to coincide with my training and usage purposes. And I was also told that a type A blood mind, or mental capacity for detail orientation and memory, was required for the work, but only a type O blood body could withstand the physical feats because of its ability to use stress to build physical attributes. So, that whole aspect is another very interesting...
So in effect, you may actually have, a dual RH factor and one's dominant? Is that what you believe?
No. From what I could gather from what Amon was telling me is that because of the genetic manipulation in the beginning of my life, they were able to somehow change my blood after the mental downloads in the training facility were complete.
Okay, that makes sense.
How? Don't ask me how. I have no idea. The only way I know for people to actually change somebody's blood, it happens to infants once in a while when they're born into an incompatible, mother-father blood relationship.
Right, like a blue baby.
Right. They'll actually drain the blood out and put a different blood in. It's crazy. So how this actually happened, I have only speculations. A number of people in my past, including my wife, including my son, have seen my eyes turn jet black. Mm-hmm. My son has actually witnessed partial shifts before, and other odd things that I wrote in detail about in my book. And the whole question, of course, comes down to why? What is the purpose of all this in my past? And in this wolf-human frequency activation, I was used to kill, as well as in blood rituals. Each one of these times I can clearly remember Lilith being present. I've had many bleed-throughs, and they have allowed me to gain many memories from within the shifted state, because it is still my mind. Anybody who's been programmed, mind-controlled, any of you who have altered states, they're just aspects of you that are sealed off from your core consciousness. So the information is there. It's a matter of being able to merge these back together so that you can fully tap into this information bank. And we'll get into this as the series goes on. But even though, consciously I wasn't tuned into my actions during shifts, right, the altered states of my mind were fully present. And like I said, they're simply part of me, and thus my mind. Also, the subconscious logs every detail over our lives. And if we can learn to access this, we can find many details that otherwise would be unfound. My other major cross-check base was my training facility nurse, who I wrote about in some detail in my book. I believe her name in the book was Kyra.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And when I met her years after leaving the training facility, and during a time when bleed-throughs were beginning very strongly, she told me a great deal about these tests that were run on us while we were in the training facility, and mine in particular. And she also told me about the rituals and the genetic manipulation usage that enhanced the training. And, Amand was telling me that, most people die in genetic manipulation projects. I'm told that it's extremely rare to find people who have survived and actually been used for project purposes. I don't really know this as a fact or not. It's just what I've been told.
Yeah, I've heard anecdotal evidence as well from people in other projects, that there's, and probably one of the most high profile of these is Montauk, which operated both in the United States and the UK. Mm-hmm. And anecdotally, I've been told that, there was a huge mortality rate, certainly in the early parts of the projects, and some of the mortality had to do with people who maybe didn't physically die, but just went completely insane from what they were exposed to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting that you bring up Montauk because, again, I'm still working on cross-checking this stuff, but I was told that this level of project that I was involved with was actually a future branch of the old Montauk project. And when I'm talking about the genetic manipulation part, not so much the assassination training facility aspect. But like I said, I'm still trying to cross-check that. I don't know if I'll ever find out, but it's an interesting research. Now,
can I go back for a minute? There's something I want to ask you about while it's still in the brackets. You talked about the overlay of demon energy. And I guess this goes into the ritual aspects as well. I mean, we're talking about genetic manipulation, which is biochemical. We're talking about energy manipulation, which goes into the area of, I guess, what you would call a hard science type thing, frequencies. But now, with the overlay of demon energy, we're talking about something that operates on an entire level that we would consider to be spiritual. Can you give me insight into how that works or how they are harnessing this energy, this demonic energy?
Now, that leads me into a misconception that I had for a while. So I have been told that this kind of manipulation is based upon what's known as moonchild programming. But again, I'm not really sure. Yes, the moonchild is tortured during the fetus stage, and yes, demons are layered into the mind, but it also has to do with religious cover altars, of which I have none. So as much as it's similar, I feel that in my case it had more to do with a specific genetic manipulation and control rather than demonization, even though there seems to be aspects of demonization involved.
Okay. But we're basically talking about the energy itself, not necessarily, let's say, the personality traits or anything like that. This energetic is layered into it in a way that they basically have tapped into something that's a different frequency range than what we would get in our normal spectrum.
Yeah, these, and this aspect, I was told, began while my mind was still forming in the fetus stage, and then also within a very short time after I was born. And then it picked up again between the ages of 7 and 13. And I've written about this on my website, about my recollections of being taken on summer nights to some underground basement facility very close to where I lived in Pennsylvania. I actually found the entrance to the tunnel for this years later. But very traumatic events happened in that place that involved invoking terror. And the main events that occurred were being tied wrists and ankles and then being tormented by humans wearing demon-style masks. And of course, at the time, I felt they were actually demons and that I was, dreaming a very real dream. It's
that's not a small detail, by the way. Thank you for that, because interviewing abductees who believe they've experienced so-called alien abductions, and I'm not doubting what anybody's experience is, there is a strong body of evidence that indicates that that is a similar tactic that's used there as well in what's called military abductions, my labs.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe they were actual dreams, but they were very real, and if they were, then they were very real and quite clearly set up in the dream state by programmers. The basements were all cement, very damp. There were puddles on the filthy floors, and it was dark besides a dim, bare light bulb that was hanging on the ceiling. Each time I can remember being there. The masks were always white with black and red highlight facial features. There was also a metal water trough in one of the corners that I remember being thrown into and held under. Now, I know the purpose of this was to further fracture my mind in order to create space for future alters. And I know in my gut that it was connected to the genetic project, but I don't know the details as to how. I can only speculate that it had something to do with creating greater internal separation for the piggyback frequency to perhaps grow. And the demon energy that, to my understanding, the demon energy aspect of this, or the demonization, if you want to call it that, comes into utilizing rituals combined with technology, combined with who knows what, to tap into lower astral entities. So these are very low-level entities that exist in the non-physical layer of what we know as the astral plane. And these energies are actually laced into the fragment zones of the mind through technology. I think it's done by frequency. Probably has some ritual that goes with it, I don't know. But the main purpose that I have come to the conclusion of my own path of these demon energies being there for is to keep me from accessing all the areas of myself and actually merging myself back into one core being. The demon energies are there to basically as guardians to guard.
Yeah, that's the
fracture
picture I
zones.
was getting. Yeah.
But I do remember some rituals where Lilith was present, and these were blood rituals that were used to invoke demon energies. And I remember two of them very specifically. And the demon energy, the demon name that was continually repeated throughout the ceremony. And the ceremony took place, everything was pure white. The walls were white, the floor was white, the ceiling was white, Any furniture in the room was white. The people who had clothes on, they were all dressed in white. Everything was white. The only thing that had any color was the red five-pointed star that was painted on the floor. But the name Moloch was the only one that I can ever remember hearing. And so, to give people a little bit of a better background on my history and the levels of trauma that I have gone through and I have had to heal from, and I'm still working on healing from, I thought it was very important to bring this piece of information out publicly. Again, this is definitely not a whistleblower thing at all. This is just so you can better understand where I come from, so that as we go along with this series, you might be able to relate to different areas of my life. Whether you relate to them or not doesn't really matter, because, what I have tried to heal from, and I'm still trying to heal from, was intense enough that you can pretty much fit it into...
it's a big space. It really is.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, that's why I decided to come forward and talk about this on the first show. And actually, I feel better for doing so. I feel a lot better now than I did at the beginning.
I understand your apprehension in bringing it out, and I understand that, that may be part of your programming, but it's also very human in terms of the things that we want to keep locked down in our mind, compartmentalized. And in sharing that, knowing my listenership and knowing some of the things that people have shared with me, you doing that enables them to also confront things, because I have people at different stages of dealing with fragmented memories, dealing with memories that are beginning to seep out of the cracks, people who are dealing on a daily basis with depression, suicide programs, rage. These are all things that you know very well are part of the breaking down of a program. And when somebody hears you share what you just shared, it gives them strength to confront. I got emails from a number of people thanking us for doing that first show, even thanking you for some of the information that you gave in that show on some simple healing techniques. And I haven't announced publicly that we were doing the series, but there were people who asked, was I going to have you back for interviews? And they really wanted to learn more. And of course, we send them over to your website, and even to the point of saying, send White Wolf an email, because you're very generous in dealing with helping people deal with this stuff. So I guess in a way, you stepping out like this is going to enable some people out there to begin to recognize their own trauma. It also enables people who are dealing with what I guess we would call, maybe, not to diminish it, lower order stress type things, to realize that what you've come out of is a testing ground for a lot of the techniques that you utilize.
Yeah, and that's true. It takes from whatever path you come from whatever trauma you have experienced, it takes a great deal of inner strength and courage and commitment to self and self-truth to really come forward. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to come forward and write a book or go public on the radio or in newspapers, but just to go public within the realm of your own mind, to say, it's time to address this, it's time to deal with it, and it's time to surpass it and move on. But the only way you can do that is to, first of all, accept that it's there, explore it as much as you possibly can to gain as many of the details as you can, because it's hard. It's very hard to do your work if you refuse to look at the details, because that, I call it mouse mind. And if you're not utilizing mouse mind and looking at the scrutinizing every detail and cross-checking it with as many means as you can, you truly don't know what is an illusionary reality. I mean, this is all an illusionary reality, but, the illusion within the illusion, or if it was actually, a physical reality that you experienced. A lot of these things in my past that I thought were real physical experiences, I found out to be actually programmed experiences, that they never actually physically happened. They happened to my mind, but not in the physical.
But they're still an important part of a bigger picture. Correct?
Oh, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Again, like I said, you've got to scrutinize everything because, to know whether or not it took place only in your mind or mind as well as body, or sometimes only body, is to be able to understand what level of techniques, what level of self you need to approach to properly deal with that layer of your experiences. Because your body reacts to things differently than your mind, and different areas of your mind react to different things, within the construct of the mind, let alone from the body. So to understand where these took place in your life is of vital importance, I have found out. And I think I did my best in my book to really lay out, the areas in my life that did take place in the physical and areas that were, strictly isolated to the mind, and how that affected me differently as my life went on. I have started to write a second book. It's called Tracking Demons, and it is a book about my healing, about the healing path. But because I'm so busy teaching and everything else, I don't know when I'm going to ever finish the book. And so that was one reason I decided to come forward with this radio series, to maybe get some of that basic information out there to the public so that you can see that it can be done.
Yeah, that's the important part. Because I think what both you and I share in terms of a vision is not oriented towards trotting out more information. We're bathing in information constantly, largely because of the internet, and that's not a bad thing. But my personal goal in even interviewing people such as yourself has not been, as I said earlier, to do whistleblower or titillation. It has been to bring information out to help people, even helping myself to a large degree. I've been very honest. A lot of what I do on this show is for me kind of a form of therapy as well. And so I've learned that people who are healers are people that have been healed. And so the goal is actually multifaceted from my perspective in bringing people like you on and presenting the information, but then going beyond the information into something that's constructive and something that can go towards healing, raising people up and building them up so that they become healers too. This is very much a proactive thing that I believe you've been doing for a lot of years in terms of this cycle, breaking the cycle. We break the cycle of abuse and these secret black projects, and we do that one person at a time, but each person then becomes another, another brick in the wall, so to speak, in terms of getting to a place of healing.
Yeah, I agree completely, 100%. Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to wrap this up. One of the things that's going to occur probably, White Wolf, is we will begin to get some feedback from the listeners, and I want to encourage that. Even questions and things like that, although what I find with things like this is that questions will get answered pretty organically as we flow through this. But I'll put it out there that if anybody wants to ask questions, or if there's something that you want dealt with, or if you are dealing with something yourself in your own life, that you can contact me via the email form at offplanetradio.com, and I assume that you're open as well for correspondence.
Yeah, definitely. Firewolfways at gmail.com.
Excellent, excellent. So next show, what are we going to do? Have you mapped that out at all, or are we just kind of going to go flowing with the time stream, so to speak?
Let's see. Oh, actually, one other place that they can ask questions is on my website. In the left-hand information bar, you'll see an Ask White Wolf. You can click on that. People, you can do it anonymously. It doesn't matter. But people go ahead and they write questions in there, and then I get them, and then when I have time, I answer them and then post them. So that's another way that you can do it.
Nice.
Well, I think I can only talk from my own personal experience, and so I think the best way for me to present information is how I have experienced the healing process to work in my own personal case. And through that, I will present, how it came to be, how my healing path actually started, what steps I began taking when it started, what levels of myself it began on when I started, and then go from there and really lay out how it progressed, and see how far we get. Because within that, I would like to try to encompass all levels of ourselves, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, and on, and wrap it into a whole kind of very, very real storyline that will hopefully answer people's questions about how a healing path, from this type of stuff looks from a unique perspective. How I dealt with it, how I learned to deal with it, the problems that came up along the way, how I learned to deal with those, how I made contacts with other individuals who helped me out, took bits and pieces from. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's going to wrap it up for this session. This is session 1 of, I don't even know what we're going to call this yet. We'll find something appropriate at some point. And so we'll get together, and there'll be a session 2 as well. Again, you can find this information at offplanetradio.com, and you can contact me through that website, or you can go to waysofthewildinstitute.com and contact my co-presenter, White Wolf von Atzingen. White Wolf, thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Randy. It was a pleasure, enlightening as always, and I look forward to future sessions.